Well, thanks everybody for joining us today on today's webinar. Well, let's see here. Let's wait a minute here. It looks like we got a couple more people jumping on before we get started with today's lineup of speakers. Glad to have all of you with us today.
Do go light something, please.
Uh-oh. I don't know if that was for me.
If we could just get everyone to mute your phone or your computer, whatever you're using, just to stay on mute throughout the presentation today, unless it's your time to present. If you have questions, just leave them in the comments, please.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. All right, well, let's jump into it. Looks like we've got most of everyone we expected to see this morning, just kind of watching the audience arrive over there in the chat window. As Tim said, please feel free to just add your comments, your questions specifically into the comment section, and then we'll be curating those throughout this discussion this morning and be able to get to that towards the end. But again, thank you for everyone for joining us today. As you know, the UPIC operations offer growers the advantage of direct relationship with consumers who come back to the farm experience year after year, which is an extremely important connection for our industry with consumers to have that direct connection. And we can see that in our own website analytics here at USHBC. And so this is an important subject. We understand that certainly the questions we've gotten over the course of this season, but the world has certainly changed. And today's webinar was put together with the help of our growers on how to help manage through these new and dynamic changes. So questions like how do you operate and promote a safe and healthy environment for your customers and your employees during this 2020 season have come up, and we've been fielding those questions here at the USHBC office. So we felt like we'd bring together this webinar and a great lineup of subject matter experts to discuss these new realities and best practices for UPIC blueberry operations, including two growers from Florida who just wrapped up their UPIC season and can provide a perspective on what you might expect and consider as you continue planning and preparing for your season. So if we can move forward with the slide, as a part of today's experience will be a time for all of you to ask questions. So as Tim was just talking about here, as you can see on the screen, the WebEx platform we're using has a chat feature. This enables all of you audience members to input direct questions there. Please feel to enter your questions for the speakers there throughout the webinar. So don't wait. If something pops up as you're hearing something, just type it in over there, and then we'll get to those questions at the end during our planned question and answer period. So moving right along, our guest speakers today are Laura McDermott, small fruit specialist at the Cooperative Extension for Canal. I'd like to start by introducing Laura. Laura has had 30 years of experience working with small fruit growers and participating in applied research and demonstration activities. She'll take us through a specific set of best management practices for UPIC operations. As I shared earlier, we also grabbed two blueberry growers out of Florida to join us today. Brooke Hill of Southern Hill Farms and Denton Chapman of Double C Bar Ranch are both with us today. Both Brooke and Denton manage successful UPIC operations in Florida, and we look forward to having them share their experience and adjustments they've made going into their season. So now with those introductions, I'd like to turn it over to Laura to take us through UPIC best practices during this global pandemic. Thanks so much for joining us today, Laura. We really appreciate it. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you to the USHBC for inviting me, and thanks for all the great work you do on behalf of blueberry growers. I appreciate it. We can start my deck and move forward. So in early April, we realized that dramatic for New York State and for the entire country, we had all of a sudden received tons of questions from our growers, and the group at Cornell, which part of that group was faculty members Marvin Pritz and Anu Rangarajan, both of who have worked with small fruits for many, many years, and also owned their own UPIC enterprises. So they were really helpful. And Dr. Betsy Bin, who is the director of the Produce Safety Alliance, so her experience in food safety was critical. but they were part of the team that moved this kind of best management practices forward. And if we could have the next slide. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, there we go. Thank you. It's a little bit of lag, I think. Sorry about that. So we created this document. It's rather in depth, but we wanted to make sure to give growers enough information that they could choose between all of the possible ways to address this challenging situation with staying safe during the pandemic. And they are not official. They're not official federal guidelines. They're not official New York State guidelines. There are no legal binding to them. They are suggestions for what farmers could do given the situation that we will put with. So there are options for safe operation, and it's evident that this season is different than any previous season, and it's going to be, and probably has been, as we'll hear from the Florida growers, quite challenging. If I could have the next slide. We wanted to make sure that people understood that there were alternatives to UPICs, and I deal with a wide variety of growers. Many of them are highly diversified. Some of them are quite small, and so not everyone has to open for UPIC. You could provide custom picking. You can increase your direct sales of your UPIC'd or we picked fruit prior to the season and market them through farm stands, developing online sales, and we have lots of ideas for how to do that using different platforms. But those were just options, and we wanted to get that right out front. Many of our growers are older, some of them are quite small, and some of them deal with very heavy crop situations. And at that point, some of them are right close to New York City. There was a lot of anxiety about that situation back in April. I think some of that has waned and people are feeling a little more confident now. So that's great. Could I have the next slide? So the big thing is that for our growers and everyone, I think, is communication is key. Staying up to date on current COVID-19 recommendations as they change. And in our state, they seem to be changing daily. So we really have to keep our growers apprised of what's happening at the state level. And then forming and training employees, making sure they understand that separation of weighing produce from payment is recommended, just to limit the amount of customers at one spot, and then customer management in the field might also be helpful. And then informing customers of COVID-19 farm practices, and part of that would be the eliminating entertainment and congregation activities, which is going to be really hard because a lot of people look forward to that on farms, and we've worked hard to make the farm, the UPIC experience, be really family friendly, but making sure that people understand that that may change this year. And then providing hand washing and sanitizing stations, posting signs, and understanding, having the customers understand the customer flow. Next slide, please. So again, communicating those policies, making sure you have correct signage, things are right up front and right out there in front of people. The biggest thing that we are trying to make sure is that customers that have been ill or are currently displaying symptoms, and unfortunately for those folks, including myself, that are allergy sufferers, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge, but we just want to make sure that those folks do understand that they probably should not come to the farm. Communicating physically distanced situations. So one way to do that would be one-way customer flow in the field. Trying to figure out capacity of your fields, and we have some guidelines for that. Trying to help families understand that they need to keep their children close to them, that it's unfortunately not as family friendly perhaps as it has been in the past, but we're really encouraging families to go pick fruit, and then just no picnicking or serious congregating at this time. We do have some recommendations about containers, and many of our growers have are definitely doing things slightly differently, but basically making sure that containers are not handled repeatedly without being washed and sanitized. So new containers, or having customers bring their own, some you're able to limit the handling of those containers by employees. Hand washing and sanitizing, again, we are recommending that customers cover their face in the patch, and if they can, and then especially at the check-in and check-out stage where they're going to be meeting your employees. We are also confirming that from a produce safety situation and from COVID perspective, we're trying to discourage pets in the field, and that confirm that customers understand these policies. So a lot of people are doing that with just a nod as they come in and check in. A few farms are asking them to kind of sign off a waiver, which is certainly their prerogative, but most farms that I'm aware of are not doing that, but just some confirmation that people understand these challenges. So we can have the next slide. Way about physical distancing has been to, and I don't know if I really said this specifically, but kind of appointment picking. A lot of our farms that are especially closer to New York City in the lower Hudson Valley are doing this because their crowds are so enormous that they just can't manage them. So they're trying to get people to use social media platforms to do appointment picking. And I think we are only entering the beginning of our strawberry season, and so far that's gone relatively well. It's very difficult if people make a drive and they're just arrival, so that is a tricky situation, but it is one way to kind of help people physically distance. Other ways are making sure to consider the number of rows needed to maintain 6-foot distance. For blueberries, that's not necessarily a problem. But we want to avoid the situation that's in that picture. We want to make sure that people have plenty of space in between them. So one-way traffic close, numbering the rows so people understand where they're supposed to go, assigning customers to rows might be a way. Again, family groups staying together, and using flagging to monitor picking progress. We encourage growers, if they're going to use something like a flag, it might need to be sanitized every single day just to be sure. Again, some of these things, some of you may think are overkill, but remember where we were when we put these guidelines together. We know so much more about the virus now, but we are trying to err on being conservative. And so sanitizing things that are touched repeatedly during the day, it would be important to controlling the move of the virus. We do encourage people who used to move passengers in trolleys or wagons. We're trying to discourage that because it requires more congregation. So we're trying to eliminate that, and then help people understand that the focus is on picking. So, try not to move around as much in the field as you normally would have, trying to get people to understand where the porta potty is before they go into the field, or hand washing prior to going into the field and hand washing out of the field. All of those things would be helpful to ensuring physical distancing in the field itself. Can I have the next slide, please? And then these are just quickly, just some graphics that are on the fact sheet about trying to maintain physical distancing, one-way traffic. This would probably be a strawberry field or a small vegetable field that doesn't have a trellis. Next slide, please. And this is another one that for some of our strawberry fields that have very long rows, because we didn't want people to double back, we actually had them cut rows using, and they were happy to do this because it helped manage the crowds, have a main thoroughfare. So they just cut it out in the middle of the field with a weed whacker or mowed it down. Next slide. And this next slide would be more for blueberry farms that because of the way the fields are laid out and the width of the rows and the bushes themselves, we probably could have physically distanced even with having people in every row. And then just trying to encourage them to pick on one row, not to go back and forth, just so that they wouldn't be too close to other pickers. Again, we have thousands of people a day, and I'm sure you guys are dealing with the same thing, but it can get quite crowded in some of these fields. So these are just some suggestions to help maintain that physical distancing in the field. Can I have the next slide, please? So the big risk is probably check and check out. And so weighing produce and handling payments is really where people will have to spend some time thinking about their operation. And we thought that before the season, people might want to consider reducing the need to handle cash. We just thought that making change and things is going to require more time, perhaps more exchange of in between the employee and the customer. So that was one example of things that farms might consider. Preparing to accept credit cards, all kinds of electronic payments. Certainly most of our farms have already been doing that, but trying to encourage people. One problem that we have is that we don't have good internet connection in some parts of upstate New York because of our terrain. So this is a real challenge for some farms. Encouraging personal checks. Not many people use checks anymore, but that might be a quick and easy way to just do a one-way, no extra touching or repeated touching of electronic payments. And then setting some kind of unit price for volumes rather than weight might be one way to do it. And this picture below is just what it was on a website of a farm in our region they're giving one free picking container. They do require an entry fee, and then you can get more picking containers available for purchase, but they're trying to eliminate people bringing their own containers, and it just kind of makes things at checkout flow a little bit easier. But then during the season, providing hand sanitizer at the entrance, hand sanitizer at the exit, markers to help with physical distancing at the checkout, very similar to a supermarket if you guys are doing that in your local supermarkets. Maybe a family member helps check out while others exit, so that instead from the picking party come up, it's just one person that's handling that. And employees trying to maintain 6-foot distance and using a face cloth while interacting with the customers. We're trying to, and I know a lot of businesses are really not that happy with being the ones that are setting the precedent, but that's kind of what we have to do as a business in New York State, is we have to kind of lead the charge and be good examples. If you cannot have that 6-foot distance, we have had some farms that have installed plastic shields. We have encouraged people to consider having an employee that weighs the produce and another employee that's doing all the payments. And on our large farms, this is already being done. And again, encouraging the employees to wash and sanitize their hands and scales between transactions. These are all really important things to do, because the real critical piece of this is right there during the checkout mostly. So can we have the next slide, please? And then again, encouraging your employees to understand the importance of a correct protocol for cleaning and sanitizing. Cleaning and sanitizing all items daily, or maybe even every hour or so, couple of hours, depending upon the amount of crowds that you have, but certainly daily. Porta potties, hand washing stations, credit card machines, scales, flags, etc. All of these things have to be considered while you're managing the cleanliness of your operation. Next slide. And then the biggest thing that we are really, really encouraging people is that my serious concern is just protecting employees and family members. If we had the highest infection rate when we were writing this in the country in New York State. And now we happily are not there, but it was of real concern. So make people understand that upon arriving at work, before and after eating, after using the restroom, all the time, washing their hands, emphasizing hand sanitation between customers, make sure they know how to wash their hands correctly, which I'm sure most people do. Employees should be provided with PPE. So the farm needs to make a decision. Everybody should have a face covering, and then instruct the employees on the proper use, storage, and washing of that face covering. If you're going to use gloves, and we're not necessarily recommending gloves, but some people really want to use gloves, instruct them on the proper use of those gloves, and make sure that employees wear clean clothes every day and wash their farm clothes separately from other clothes. This is a Produce Safety Alliance and best management practice for food safety, and so we are incorporating it into the COVID-19 recommendations. Next slide, please. And folks that helped on this, Anu Rangarajan, Elizabeth Bin, Marvin Pritz, and Julie Suarez, and then my colleague Esther Kibbe with Cornell Cooperative Extension. All of this information is on a sheet that you can download. And I really wish you guys a good luck and a great, productive, and safe season.
All right, thank you, Laura. And I was just putting in the chat window as well as Laura wraps up here. If you have any questions for Laura, please add those in the chat window, and we can get to those when we get into the Q&A section. So I know we've got a few people who arrived late, so thank you for joining us today. My name is Casey Cronquist. I serve as president of the U.S. High Bush Blueberry Council, and we're glad you're here. We're now going to jump into a couple of experiences that growers had this season. So we'll be hearing from Denton and Brooke and their on-farm experiences of their operations this year. I'd like to start off with Denton, first to talk about the success and challenges that his farm, Double C Bar Ranch, had this season. So Denton, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name's Denton Chapman. I'm with Double C Bar Ranch. I'm the fourth generation. Primarily, we're a cattle ranch. We produce beef, and we sell all of our beef locally here in the state of Florida. We finish it here and market through restaurants. And we've been in the citrus since the 50s, and that kind of was wiped out back in the 04 hurricanes, and citrus greening kind of really put us off the map with citrus. And so we went into blueberries, and that's where we're at now. We're 4 years now planting blueberries. We're primarily a commercial blueberry operation. And a couple years ago, we decided, hey, let's share what we have and invite the public out here, and we started UPIC. So kind of I want to talk to you guys just a little bit about some advice, some tips that we ran into this year, and primarily even moving forward to 2021 in the future if you're thinking about starting a UPIC operation at your farm. This year was challenging. Our fruit comes in late February and into the beginning of May, and we actually started UPIC the first week of March, and we went 2 weeks. Well, when regulations with COVID started, we kind of had to make a decision. What do we do? And the challenge we had was, do we stay open, because we are primarily a commercial operation? We decided to actually close our UPIC and just focus on commercial and plan for next year. It wasn't a fun decision to make, to have to stop. We love having the public out here, but that was a decision we made. And then we ended up doing a pre-pick drive-through. And so we provided blueberries to the public in a different form of fashion. And I believe Brooke's going to talk about their operation with pre-pick. So I just want to hit on 3 tips that we did as starting a blueberry UPIC operation. And hopefully some of you can take these tips and apply them to your farm. Every farm is going to be a little bit different. You kind of have to adapt to their surroundings and conditions And the first one is marketing and advertising. We're very secluded, our farm and ranch, and to get the public out here, you got to do some marketing and advertising. So the first tip is to get the word out there. Social media is definitely the easy, quick, fast, and cheap way to get the word out there that you can provide a blueberry or other kind of a farm product. Word of mouth will follow, and we put signs up at the road. That's another tip. That way people know when they're coming, hey, there it is, let's turn in. And we also had people just drive by, see the sign, and pull in and purchase some berries or come out and pick. So signage is very important. The second tip I want to share is, I think this is my biggest, is create an atmosphere for your customers. Especially with this year, if you're fixing to start an operation for U-Pick, it's got to be a safe one. As Laura was talking earlier, you got to keep your customers in mind and keep them happy and satisfied, so they do want to come back. One of the things we do is moving forward for next year, for anybody thinking about it, is you got to have some shade, you got to have some seating. You want your customers to come out, enjoy the fresh air, get out and enjoy the land. And we're all spoiled. We want to sit in the shade once we're done picking. And so we put up different barns, a lot of seating, and we're planning on growing every single year to meet the demand of our customers wanting to come out. We also have a sandbox for the kids and some different sand toys in there, and that keeps the kids happy, and mama and daddy can sit and watch the kids play. Restrooms, that's definitely a biggie. You need to have restrooms for your customers. We actually this year put in a handicap ramp access to get into the restrooms, so that way everybody has a chance to come out here. Keep your farm clean. That's a big one, is creating this atmosphere, a clean farm, and people want to come back. If you provide a good family fun atmosphere, they're going to come back. Third tip I want to give everybody is sell additional products. You don't want to just sell your one product. People pick the blueberries, they get a pound or two, and they head home. We got creative, and most farms do this. We make blueberry jam, jelly. You can make it in your kitchen. It falls under the cottage law. So there's some things you can do without having to go to the commercial side and sell products. We sell hats with our logo, shirts. Any farm can do that. That's as simple as find an embroidery shop in town, and you can sell a little of that, and hey, that's advertising for your U-Pick farm. We also have bees on the property where we do sell honey from the farm. A lot of it is blueberry honey. For food wise, if you want to set up as your own vendor, you could sell food. An easy way, as starting out in a U-Pick operation, bring in food vendors, charge for a spot, and now your customers have multiple things to enjoy while they're there. So these are my 3 tips. It's helped us be successful as a U-Pick operation, and every year we do plan on just keep adding a little bit more, as that the budget allows. And I think the most rewarding part of running a U-Pick operation is talking to the customers and sharing agriculture with them. They want to ask questions, answer questions, and the joy I think that brings when people come out in a U-Pick operation, it goes a long way, and that's very satisfying. So that's kind of my little spiel. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Denton. Appreciate your time. As you were thinking back, I know you were thinking about this presentation today, but as you were thinking back over your season as it concluded, what stood out to you as the most notable experience you had in the adjustments you had to make this year with your operation?
I think we had, like I said, we chose to stop our U-Pick, and a lot of customers, they wanted to be out here, they wanted to get out. So what the best part of what we did is we went to a pre-pick operation where we pre-packaged and we did a drive-through, and it took us by surprise how many people wanted to get out and enjoy just getting some fresh air. They stayed in their cars, and we did the pre-picked and delivered fruit right to their window. And I tell you what, they loved it. They loved just that fact of getting out, because when the pandemic started, when we were right in the middle of our U-pick, so we had to adjust, and that was memorable for us, because the joy of people when they came out just to get some fresh berries picked that morning, delivered right to their window, was priceless for us.
Yeah, and just tell me, had you ever gone pre-pick before this? Had you ever experienced?
We've during U-pick, we always we'll have some pre-pick fruit, and we'll keep it at the checkout counter when people pick, and they pick 4 pounds, and if they want an extra pound, we'll sell them an extra pound of fruit to take home, so they take home 5 pounds. Some that have trouble getting around very easily out in the field, they prefer just to come up and get fresh berries straight from the farm. So we'll always do some pre-pick, but this year was a little different. We had to go above and beyond,
sure,
and provide a lot.
Nothing like the scale you saw this year.
It was interesting, I tell you what. So anyone who's fixing to start their U-pick operation, just plan well, plan your flow and social your distancing, and people will get out. People want to get out and get to the farm, so that you'll be successful.
So, and one last, that won't be the last question. We'll get into some other Q&A, but before I let you go and move on to Brooke, just an idea of the biggest challenge. What was it that stood out as, obviously maybe it doesn't sound like it was the challenge of moving from U-pick to pre-pick, but as you think through the adjustments you made in real time, for you and your team, what stood out to you as an experience or a thought for others to consider that you had to pivot on, change, fix, address, customer interactions, customer service?
Well, that's kind of it. Was just figuring out the flow. You got to figure out how to satisfy everybody, follow the recommendations of keeping your distancing without losing customers, and that was the challenge of how to do it. And I can't, like I said, there was not one perfect way of doing it. It's just, I think it's the flow of getting people in and out without having to be congregated, or wait in long lines. So make sure whatever you do, you have plenty of workers on hand working, because there was actually one day, and we didn't plan it well. Like I said, we didn't anticipate the people showing up, but we had some were waiting 2 hours in line to get berries. So, and that was a flow problem. We didn't have enough workers. We ended up going to multiple lines to check out and deliver fruit to those windows. So if you anticipate a lot of customers, try to eliminate the lines. Everybody's a little on edge over the last few months. So if you can provide a good experience by that, that'll make some happy customers.
Excellent. All right. Well, hey, Denton, I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing with us, and we'll probably get back to some questions for you. I can see some things popping up in the chat window there. So thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Next up, we'll hear from Brooke, who's been running a very successful U-pick operation at Southern Hill Farms for many years now, and I've gotten to know part of her family already in my travels down into Georgia and Florida. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Brooke. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today. So just a little bit about me. I work directly with my mother and father-in-law. They are the owners of Southern Hill Farms, which is located in Claremont, Florida. It's just to give some relation between Denton and I. We do know Denton very well and his family, and our farm is about an hour north of their farm. We're just west of Orlando. We are in a very highly populated area. So we do have a lot of customers that come out every season that want to experience the farm, very similar to what Denton was saying. They just want to be on the farm. They want to experience agriculture. So I actually did not grow up in agriculture. My husband's family has been farming for many generations, I believe 4 or 5 of them, and most of them have been right here in Central Florida. So my mother and father-in-law began the farm in Claremont specifically after the farm on Lake Apopka. They had worked with my mother-in-law's family for many years together, and that farm closed due to an eminent domain in the late 90s. And the St. John's Water Management District, which is in our area, reclaimed all of our wetlands. So that farm closed. My mother and father-in-law opened or began a nursery in the land that we still farm on today in Claremont. And when my husband and I, we both went to Auburn University, we graduated college in 2010. So they had about, of over 120 acre farm, 80 of it was planted with the nursery trees. So there was still 40 acres open that hadn't been utilized, and they knew they wanted to diversify, but couldn't manage the process by themselves. So when we graduated from college, they reached out to my husband, said, hey, if you want to come back and work with us, we really want to utilize this farmland for something. So they did a lot of market research and decided to plant blueberries. So that's kind of how our start in blueberries began. I began working for the company in 2013 after their bookkeeper of 24 years had retired. They had an opening in the office, so I actually began in the office. I learned how to do all the bookkeeping for the farm. And then it was actually my husband and I who had the idea of starting an agritourism business with our blueberries. So they were all commercially harvested for the first 4 years that we planted them in 2010. And then in 2014, was the first year we allowed the public to come and pick during our season as well. So since then, we have grown quite rapidly. I think a lot of that is a testament to the area that we live in and how many people, it's a very heavily populated area. Like I said, a lot of families, our demographic is very much similar to Michael and I. It's our age, people with young children who want to get out and experience being on the farm. So I am going to kind of touch on, kind of very similar to Denton, just some experiences that we've had at our UPIC in general, and then also touch a little bit on specific to this year, everything going on with coronavirus. So we started, again, my husband and I, it was our idea to start the UPIC. My mother and father-in-law were not initially sold on the idea. They had some reservations about allowing the public to come out to the farm. We actually put together a business plan, I presented it to them. They thought it was, they kind of came around to the idea after bringing it up several times. So the main reason why we as a family decided to start our UPIC was sustainability and diversity. So the years that our commercial market for our blueberries wasn't great, we had another way to try to sell our fruit. And to also produce year-round income. So we knew that we wanted to grow our UPIC, that it wouldn't just remain blueberries, that kind of year by year, we would take it, use our cash flows to expand that business so that it actually it is now a completely separate business from our farm. We have a different business entity that we run all of our agritourism business through. So we now, in our spring season, when we have blueberries, we do also do sunflowers, zinnias, peaches, and sweet corn. So those are all just primarily for UPIC. We don't commercially harvest any of them. They don't get distributed anywhere other than to guests that come out to the farm to pick them and participate in harvesting them. So, and then we also have included, starting in 2016 was our first year, we included our fall festival. So we don't, in our area of the country, pumpkins don't grow well in the fall. So we actually have to import pumpkins from other parts of the country. But we do also have the sunflowers and zinnias and sweet corn in the fall because we can grow those crops at that time. So those are the interactive crops, but people can still pick out a pumpkin. It's just not UPIC. And then, especially this year, everything going on with coronavirus, the public's interest in getting to know their local farm, what is in season and where, right down the street from their house. They want to connect with that. They want to feel that sense of community, and that I don't believe that generations prior, just from what I've heard, it wasn't really as I don't know the word that I'm looking for, like a thing to do or something that people really look to experience. Whereas with our generation and now, and I think with social media, people really love to know those specifics. So that was kind of why we started. And then it's even more pertinent now, just with everything going on. There was a tremendous awareness brought, at least in Florida, where we're located, awareness brought to buying local, know your local farm, find out what's growing in your area, especially in the springtime when all of this was going on, which just happened to be, like Denton had mentioned, right in the middle of our blueberry season. So moving on to best practices. So I'll touch on this briefly, just so I don't take up too much of our time here. Some things that we still face that was true this spring, it's true every other year that we've been open. We, as close as we are to Orlando, we're only about 13 minutes from Walt Disney World. We still are somewhat remote in terms of our road accessibility. So our UPIC, again, I believe the number one driving factor behind our success and how we have been able to grow so rapidly is because of our location. We have a tremendous amount of housing right around us. We do also have some people just traveling that will visit and want to participate in agritourism. They're traveling, they don't actually live in our area. We have people come from North Florida. And then our close proximity to Walt Disney World, we have all those people coming too. So one of the things we still are challenged with is Schofield Road, which is the only road to get to our farm, is a clay road. Being where we are in Central Florida, many people, and the majority of people have never even seen a clay road or been on a clay road. So for them, and as many of you know, if you're somewhat remote, clay and the rain, it gets really bumpy. It's hard to drive on. So we do our best to maintain it. The county does maintain it some, but we do a lot of the maintenance ourselves. So just kind of to think about, if you're thinking about starting a UPIC or you're thinking about growing yours, just how are people going to get to the farm? Do you have a lot of people who live in your area? Will they be having to travel a long distance to get to you? These are all things to think about. What is the road system getting to you? Targeted marketing. So I feel like another reason why we have been successful is because of the demographic around us. We knew was almost exactly the type of people, like they're people my husband and I's age with young children. We do also have a good amount of people of all ages and walks in life that visit our farm, but definitely the majority are younger families. So what is your demographic in your area like? Like, I know there's a few farms I can think of that are very close to the villages, which is a very large retirement community, about an hour and a half north of our farm. So for them, their demographic is going to look very different than our demographic. So just getting to know who's around you. If you're unsure, if you don't even know how to begin finding that out, if your demographic around you is not necessarily the walk of life that you're in, try reaching out, finding a way, hiring an ag marketer, somebody to help you kind of tap into who those people are who will be visiting you. And then also for future expansion, thinking about things like, do you have ample room for parking if you continue to grow? For us, we actually ended up having to lease land that's not ours, it's right adjacent to ours. We lease land, which is where they park, because all of our farmland was being utilized for our crops. Do you have room to increase crops? Like for us, we've put in 5 acres of peaches. We've put in sunflower, several acres of sunflowers and zinnias, as well as an acre of corn. We had to remove some of our nursery trees in order to do that, as well as all of our infrastructure that we've done, which that was part of our business model, was to phase out that nursery to increase our agritourism business. So just thinking about that, what does that expansion look like on your farm? Is it even feasible? And that'll help you get a good idea of what you want your business plan to look like. Things to consider. I think that Denton had mentioned this a little bit. People really want to come out to the farm. Sometimes they're persistent. Even in years like this year, one of our surprising challenges that we faced is that people didn't want to take no for an answer. So we actually, because of the varieties that we grow a little bit different varieties than Denton and his family, but our blueberry season didn't begin until mid-March. So and that was our commercial harvest as well. So our opening day that we had planned for our UPIC was actually the exact week that the state of Florida started their quarantine ban, and all businesses had to shut down. So we were an essential business in the sense that we were providing produce, but it was not in the sense that we could not be hosting events on the farm. So because of that, we had a lot of pushback. A lot of the farms in our area, Denton's family did close theirs as well, but there were a lot of other farms that remained opened and only strictly allowed U-Pick. We talked about it considerably and we ended on this decision, and I'll touch on that in just a few minutes. But just to quickly kind of get through these. So good customer service, I think, is another driving force behind our success. We have made it a top priority of ours since we first began our U-Pick. So as long as you have a plan in place, if you're not familiar with it, I actually got my degree, my bachelor degree in hospitality management. So I was very well versed. I knew what to expect in that regard, which has helped us tremendously. So seasonal labor is another one of our biggest issues. As we have grown, so has our need to have help on the farm in all areas. So thankfully, we do have a very large labor pool just because of our location. But just to think about that, who will be working for you seasonally? Even though we do have a large labor pool, we have a hard time finding seasonal labor. So just to think about that too. Flexibility and adaptability. Now, this is kind of where we get into this season specifically. Every year we're faced with some sort of challenge, but this year was especially so. We, just to give you a little bit background about what we did do this season, the band started right when we were supposed to be opening. We talked about it. I can't even tell you the number of hours as a family. It felt like an eternity that we went back and forth discussing the different options. Do we open for just U-Pick? How are we going to keep not only our customers safe, but our family safe, our employees safe? We ultimately decided to do a drive-through. So we put everything that we normally would have been selling at the farm, we put it online. So we sell beer and wine. We have our beer and wine license. We have several commercial kitchens on our farm. We have a certified mobile food truck. So we took all of those things and we just found a way to get them transportable to people. So basically, we moved our entire business model online. We had an online store that we very rarely used, but we put everything on there. And if anybody's interested, I can certainly send that information out to whoever, to Casey or to somebody, if you would like to take a look at ours and see how it's set up. And that included, we have blueberry cobbler that we make, blueberry muffins, blueberry donuts, blueberry lemonade. We have food, lunch items. We have beer and wine, like I mentioned, beer and wine sales. We had a lot of things. We just found a way. So we did all pre-picked blueberries, pre-picked sunflowers, peaches, zinnias, and sweet corn. So we went on there. We had very set quantities. The blueberries we sold in 2-pound clamshells. The sunflowers we sold in bunches of 5. The sweet corn we did by the half dozen and the full dozen. And then zinnias we did as a bouquet of 12 zinnias within a mason jar. So customers could go online. We had set pickup times. They could choose a day and a time that they wanted to come pick theirs up, and we would bring it to their window for them. So all of our employees were wearing face masks. We did go back and forth on this many times, but we ultimately decided to have all of our employees wear gloves, and our family as well, because we were there every day as well. So we had masks and gloves on. Kind of as Denton said, also just make sure you have enough. We tried to start out with a minimal amount of staff, obviously to keep our costs down, since we did have such a loss of income by not being able to be open as we normally would. And then we, as like he mentioned as well, ended up one day, it was the Saturday before Easter, which is always a very busy time for us because everybody wants to come out and purchase items to have for the holiday weekend. And we ended up having a 2-hour wait for those people. And we had a lot of very unhappy customers that they had to wait that long. So we, at that point, said, hey, we've really got to ramp up our employee base that's helping us with this. So it ended up, we worked out the kinks. It took a while, but we figured it out. And I think everybody, all of our customers were very, very thankful to have that option, especially for those who could pick up fruit, vegetables, flowers, whatever they were looking for without having to get out of their vehicle and be exposed. So it ended up being very successful, more successful than I think we had hoped or anticipated, which is wonderful. But it definitely came with some challenges, just trying to figure it out. So I can see I apologize. I'm trying to read all of these questions, but I can only read a portion of them, I think, just because of the way that my screen is.
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Brooke, I will help you with that. So if
Okay.
if you want to wrap up, I can bring back those questions that we're getting in the chat window. So don't get distracted. We'll pull those questions in for you at the end.
Yes. So just for me, I think the biggest challenge for us as a family, once we, aside from actually making that decision, our biggest challenge that we faced this specific season was definitely managing the online store. So we didn't, like I mentioned, we did have one set up through Square, which is our credit card processor that we use. We never really utilized it for much other than like yoga tickets on a normal year. We didn't have any yoga this year. And so the capabilities of the website are very limited. We have never really needed anything else. So the major issues were kind of managing time slots and the amount of customers coming in and how does it work. And we were having issues with, we would put inventory on the website, but then the inventory somehow would not be correct at the end of the day. And we went back and forth with Square many times. And there were still several issues that even throughout the whole 2.5 months we did it that way, we still were never able to quite figure out how to do it better, even with changing our system. Definitely the online. And then another big headache that came with online sales is, as all of you know, harvesting, you have no idea every day how much you're going to harvest. So we were having to guess, okay, this is how many peaches we expect, how many pounds of peaches we expect to harvest on 2 weeks out. But for the reality, it was very hard. So there were some days that we either over or underestimated how much we were going to be able to harvest. It wasn't so much for our blueberries, because we have 40 acres of blueberries. That was never an issue. It was more of our smaller crops that were only for traditionally you pick. There are obviously just much less quantity of them available. So that was challenging too. Just trying to guess basically how much we're going to harvest several weeks out. So, but yes, we, all in all, it was very successful. I think it, just because we were on the very beginning of the whole coronavirus pandemic within the country, and all of the different states having to make their own decisions at that point, I'm glad that we decided to remain closed. It worked very well. I think that it's definitely, for those of you who are wary or about opening in the future, it's definitely something to consider, because I think it worked very well for us. So thank you for having me, and I am happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. Fantastic. And we do have some questions, and I know we're going to try to keep this the time to the hour best we can. So please hang in there as we go through some of the questions that are here. We'll kind of prioritize these, knowing that we've got a little bit of time here left. But real quick, before I jump into the questions we're getting, Brooke, is there anything that just stood out in your mind, like you'll never forget this season because this happened?
Oh, good. There are, I think, a lot of things that will always stand out in my mind because of this season, just because of we were so blindsided by it, and things happened so quickly. So, 2 weeks prior to this whole decision that we made, we had been planning just like normal for months leading up to it. And I feel like it just kind of all of a sudden we were presented with this. So that I think maybe just the rapid changing every day, and it seemed like every day something was changing. So that was something I won't forget, that feeling of like, oh wow, okay, we are faced with this, and we've got to come up with a plan, and we got to do it very quickly, because these blueberries and peaches they're not going to wait to be harvested. So we've got to do this now.
They're not going to wait for you. Okay.
No,
well, that's good
for us. So,
well, let's jump into here. One of the things is we got here is a big concern. One of the biggest concerns, a question here, and I think this is for all three of you, but is how to keep up with where the folks have picked, and where does the next group begin picking. So you can kind of imagine this scenario. Also, they'll be using a commercial field, so the rows are really long. And I think, Laura had kind of shared a little bit of how strawberries broke it up, but that's really easy to do for strawberries. You're not going to do that in blueberries probably. And so what advice do you have those folks? The follow up to that question is, do you provide customers with a ride back to the pay station if they have to walk a long way to pick those berries? So does that, I don't know which one of you want to jump in on that first, but if that speaks to one of you more, then jump in.
Anybody?
I would say that, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go
No,
ahead,
go
Laura.
Go ahead.
I would say that, again, it just depends on the operation. And so if the rows are really long and you really don't think that you're going to have so many people that you can't have them double back, it might be worthwhile to maybe prune a bush just for the season pretty heavily and try to make some kind of exit row. But given that these are blueberries, I'm hopeful that, maybe, honestly, I don't have a real, we use flagging. We use the flagging to try to make sure that people are getting to have a different picked area.
Sure.
Many of the farms that I work with are not that happy with it as far as being able to be used. And we also are trying to limit picking times for senior citizens so that they get an early morning slot in these kind of appointment picking situations, because they are going to have more challenge perhaps than other folks just with these long rows and that one-way entrance. And so that's another consideration. And we are encouraging, and many farms use golf carts as a way to try to provide some kind of transportation for those folks that cannot manage the walk. That's a fairly efficient and relatively low cost way, and you can't congregate on a golf cart. There's only a couple of people that can fit on the golf cart. So that's how we have encouraged people to do it.
Well, and difficult, especially if you have those long rows. Denton, I don't know if you wanted to jump in there. I'm not sure how long the rows are that you have, but any thoughts there?
Sure. Our rows are 300 feet long, and the bushes are now full, so there's no crossing between rows. So
Sure.
they've got to start a row and either come back or go all the way out and around. One of the things we do is when they first come in to the farm area, we have it roped off so they specifically have to walk through one kind of gate area. Now this year obviously was different, but typically what we do is whoever's passing out the buckets, they kind of guide, the customers. We ask if they've been here before, and then kind of send them in a direction based on what kind of variety they want to pick. And we kind of watch throughout the day. If one area is where all the customers are going, as new ones come in, we kind of direct them, with our markers that we do have up to try to start hitting these rows. There's more fruit this direction, or if you want to go around to this variety, there's plenty of fruit that people haven't been to. So that's how we manage it. Brooke probably has more info as far as different varieties. We just do blueberries. That's all we have right now, so it's a little easier to manage. But if you have customers coming in for different crops, they have some crops specifically just for you pick only, so they do have to manage it a little bit more. So she can touch on how they manage that.
Well, let me jump in here because I think she might be able to answer this question too. And actually, let's move to this question just so we can get a few more questions in here. But the question is about social distancing, and that every state and region is going to have kind of a different approach as to what stage they're in and expectations for the requirements and of social distancing. But someone mentioned a way to figure out what the maximum capacity is of a given U-pick. Did you guys think through that, Brooke? Did you guys have some sort of mathematical discussion as a family about how many people you would have on the farm if you were to open it up to U-pick? And just want to know what and then of course I can pivot to Laura on what advice she's been giving.
Yes, I'd be happy to discuss it. So when we initially started talking about it, we were a lot more limited probably than the place that you all are in now. So when we first discussed the option of actually opening up the U-pick, we were only going to limit it to 50 guests per, I think we said every 30 minutes. And then we would allow 30-minute, and it would be coming onto the farm. So obviously we had 40 acres that they would have been able to spread out in. So it wouldn't have been 50 people on the farm at one time. But that would be our way of managing it, thinking, okay, and then if nothing else was available to them, we didn't have they wouldn't be able to congregate under any of our barns. It would be strictly, they came in, we would have a sanitized bucket for them, Or we even talked about at one point only giving them a clamshell. Basically, they would prepay for the clamshell, so there was no touching buckets or anything, going out into the field, filling it up, and then from there they would have to leave. And we had, I believe that's what we had talked about, was allowing 50 guests to come in every 30 minutes, thinking they're probably not going to spend more than an hour at a time. So overlapping, it would have about 100 people. Now, realistically, we didn't talk about it too in depth since we ended up not going that route. Now, I think you realistically probably could have more people. We said 50 because that's what our state had limited gatherings at that time. Couldn't be more than 50 people. And then they ended up later on reducing it to even 10 people. So that was where we came from. We didn't have necessarily a mathematical, like, hey, this many people per acre. So unfortunately, we didn't get quite that far into our conversation about it.
Sure. Well, and I think it's just good to hear, how you were kind of deliberating on the concept of it and what might happen, because you're right, everybody's kind of moving into that kind of more open environment. But I will say, and I know we're at the top of the hour here, so I think it's important to understand that everything we shared today from Laura, Brooke, and Denton, and certainly myself, that this isn't at all to be interpreted as legal advice or guidelines or rules that are legal advice in nature. So please keep that in mind as you leave the webinar today. You got to look into your local jurisdictions. Again, this is best practices. These are subject matter experts who are able to kind of weigh in here. We hope you've appreciated, all of what we've had to share today. Laura, I know in your deck you had shared this really neat mask, and so there may be a lot of questions that aren't being asked here about how do you get a blueberry mask during this time. So I don't know if that was your making or if you just found that picture online, but that was
I just found it online, and it's through Etsy. I'm pretty sure it was through Etsy. They had a lot of different blueberry choices. The one thing I would say, for those of you who've been wearing masks out in the field, you probably realize that some of the cloth face coverings are challenging in hot weather. And you might want to have masks there. Now you can buy disposable masks very inexpensively. You might want to have them there for people. They're considerably easier, I believe, to breathe through. So if you're going to require masks, you might actually want to have either disposable ones, or maybe people on the farm don't mind wearing the blueberry logo type thing, but try to make it as fun as it possibly can be. Face coverings are not what I consider fun, but I think it's really helpful for this disease. So.
Well, and I know, and that's kind of why I wanted to share the disclaimer of just how things are continuing to change jurisdictionally and regulatory wise across states and regions. Our governor in California here just announced that everywhere you go, you need to be wearing a mask. And so that's just it's something as we've moved into phase 2, that's been added back on as a restriction or a requirement. So it's constantly changing. Everyone needs to do their own due diligence here, but I do hope that everybody has felt like today's webinar has been extremely valuable for all of you. We'd like to remind everyone that if you need more support, we have industry resources available for you. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions about this webinar to info@ushbc.org. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our Behind the Blues newsletter at this address on the screen. And then we have this, I think, exciting kind of, as we roll into the month of July, which is the production season for the United States production, National Blueberry Month. So a lot of our growers who had traveled to Washington, D.C. had spent some time, really waving the flag on behalf of blueberries this year. And so I think it's great to see that the Secretary of Agriculture's proclamation for National Blueberry Month, and that we will be putting these resources together as a way for our industry to rally together the message about blueberries as a healthy superfruit and National Blueberry Month together as an industry. So be sure to visit this page on USHBC's website and download those free materials, including the Blueberry Month seal you see here on the screen, available to you for use on social media, recipe photos, and a whole lot more. So we've kind of also included that in the chat window. You can link onto some of the resources we have available there. I also want to thank my team for helping put this webinar together, specifically Tim, who you've heard his voice if you were at the beginning, and Carla Curley, who has been working behind the scenes this morning to capture your questions and monitor today's webinar. So thank you to them for their production. Well, that's it. As we roll into the weekend, I really appreciate all of you for joining us. Thank you for, I'd say, Brooke, Denton. I see Denton still there. Thank you, Denton, for your time. Thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Laura, for your expertise.
Thank
I really feel like I learned a lot today. I'm sure lots of people who are going into their season, maybe already in their season, also learned a lot today. So we really appreciate all of you for joining us, and thank you, Brooke, Denton, and Laura, for your input and advice. So with that, we're gonna call this webinar to a close. Really appreciate all of you for everything. If you've got more questions, feel free to reach me here at the USHBC office. We're here to serve and look forward to having you on our next webinar. So follow us on Behind the Blues, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.